All right, ready? All right. We'll start off with the announcements that we have. And of course, we got online Sunday school tomorrow night with Norm. And then the Providence Presbyterian Church down the road, chicken pastry fundraiser, $12 a plate. That's on the 28th from 11:30 to 7 p.m. We made Lottie Moon. That's great. And it's like Jan says, we're onward to Annie Armstrong. Um, we got a lot going on in March. You got the Brotherhood breakfast at 8:30 Sunday. Asking all the men, visitors, everybody, youth to come see us. March the 3rd, we have visitation and also have WMU at 7 p.m. North American Mission Study next Wednesday night with Jan. And then you have the senior luncheon on the 13th at Restoration Church. 14th, barbecue chicken fundraiser. Can you say chicken? Yes. Hey, what's our goal? I know 350 for the businesses. What about the total goal? 650. All right. Hey, how you doing? Hey, so we got 650. That's let's see. How many you gonna do? What? 80, 85s? Oh, you got a pre-sale then.
That's fine. I'll have my son come and get him.
Okay, y'all heard that. Y'all heard that. And you got Donut Social on the 16th. And then April 28th, we were just talking about that with Crystal about the Family Portraits Day for our church directory. That's going to be very important. We have not done one in a while. It's a lot of work, but it can be done, okay? And so it will be a success. There's no doubt. So just be on the waiting for her directions, and we'll be rolling, okay? Remember in prayer, look at your prayer list. Also just told by Chris that Jonathan's wife, Rosie, she has breast cancer, has been told, and that's Lester and Sandy's daughter-in-law. So please keep them in mind. How about Mamie Godwin? Has anybody heard anything about her? Miss Mamie? So we're good on her. I mean, that she's doing better. Has anybody heard? Oh, okay, okay. And anybody else new on there? All right.
Maxine's nephew, too, the baby, Cyrus. I know she sent several things out. They found blood in his stool. He's a newborn. And they were taking him to Wilmington today to see what was going on with that.
Okay. Anybody got anything else before we go to prayer? Gene, can you lead us in prayer?
Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you for this evening, Lord. We just come to you, Lord, and just lift up all these prayer requests to you, Lord. You know each and every one by name, Lord, and though we may not know them all, we just lift them all up to you, Lord. We pray for the lesson tonight, Lord. We pray, God, that you just give us the ears to listen and the heart to consume it all, Lord. And we just keep it all to you. We just want to pray.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. We're going to, and tonight for Joshua, if you look there, there's a lot of chapters there. So we would be here till 11 o'clock if we read all those verses. So we got 9 chapters to go through. So y'all just hold on. First thing, starting out, lessons from Joshua that we have learned so far. A true leader is first a servant. Okay, everybody believe that?
Yes.
All right. Having a good mentor can shape your destiny. Everybody believe that?
Yes.
All right. True faith means obeying God even when his instructions don't seem to make any sense to us. Isn't that right?
Yes.
So, chapters 12 through 22 of Joshua, as God in this situation here, you got Joshua as he grows older. God tells him to divide the land among the 12 tribes, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. And the allocations, inheritance of called the Levites. All right, I'm going out of Trisha's has had this Bible, and I go to it a lot. It has it's a learning Bible that I call it, because it's got here at the bottom. It gives everything that's been talked about in the verses. So that's what I'm going to be hitting on tonight, and start going through that. We'll start out in saying the following chapters that we're going through, 12 through 22, describe how the promised land was to be divided amongst the 12 tribes. First, the tribe of Levi was not to have any land because they were spent all their energies serving the people, not their own interest. Second, the tribes of Reuben and Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh, what they call it in the book, the 2.5, and that's where that's coming from, had already received land east of the Jordan River, which had been given to them by Moses in Numbers 32. Third, the tribes of Judah and Joseph, Ephraim and the other half tribe of Manasseh, had received land that the ancestor Jacob had promised them 450 years earlier, Genesis 48:22 to Joshua 15:17. The rest of the tribes divided up the remaining land by casting lots in chapter 18. Although Jacob's original blessing of the sons in Genesis 49 and Moses' blessing of the 12 tribes, Deuteronomy 33, the type of land each tribe would receive was already known. The two blessings were prophetic, for although Joshua cast lots to determine the land to be given to each of the remaining tribes, the allotments came out just as Jacob and Moses had predicted. Joshua was getting old. He was between 85 and 100 years old at this time. God, however, still had work for him to do. Our culture often glorifies the young and strong and sets aside those who are older. Yet older people are filled with the wisdom that comes with experience. They are very capable of serving if given the chance and should be encouraged to do so. Believers are never allowed to retire from God's service. Those past retirement age should not assume that age disqualifies or excuses them from serving God. Much of the land was unconquered at this point, but God's plan was to go ahead and include it in the divisions among the tribes. God's desire was that it would eventually be conquered by the Israelites. God knows the future, and He leads you. He already knows about the victories that lie ahead for us. But just as the Israelites still had to go to battle and fight, we must still face the trials and face the battles of our unconquered land. What are our unconquered lands? They may be overseas missionaries' territories, new languages in which to translate the Bible, new missionary areas in our neighborhoods, interest groups or institutions that need redemptive work, unchallenged public problems or ethical issues, unconfessed sin in our lives, or undeveloped talents and resources. What territory has God given you to conquer? This territory is your promised land. Our inheritance will be a new heaven and a new earth, Revelation 21:1, if we fulfill the mission God has given us to do. Canaan was now controlled by the Israelites, although much land and several cities still needed to be conquered. Joshua told the people to include both conquered land and unconquered lands in the territorial allotments. He was certain that the people would complete the conquest as God had commanded. One reason the Israelites encountered so many problems as they settled the land was that they failed to conquer fully the land and drive out all of its inhabitants. The cancer-like presence of the remaining pagan peoples of Canaan caused unending difficulties for the Israelites, as the book of Joseph records. Just as they failed to remove completely descend from their lives, also with disastrous results. As a self-test, reread the Ten Commandments in Exodus. Ask yourself, am I tolerating sinful practices of thoughts? Have I accepted half measures as good enough? Do I condemn the faults of others but over condone my own? Because of Joseph's godly character in Genesis 49:22, the tribes descended from him. Ephraim and Manasseh was given the richest, most fertile land in all of Canaan. Judah, who offered himself in exchange for his brother Benjamin's safety in Genesis 44, received the largest portion of land, which eventually became the southern kingdom and the seat of David's dynasty. Reuben, who slept with one of his father's wives in Genesis 49, was given desert land. The region descended here. The blessings Jacob gave to his sons accordingly to their character seem also to be reflected in the characteristics of the land each tribe received. The tribe of Manasseh was divided into 2.5 tribes that we talked about earlier. This occurred when many people from the tribe wanted to settle east of the Jordan River in an area that was especially suited for their flocks in Numbers 32. The rest of the tribe preferred to settle west of the Jordan River in the land of Canaan. The tribe of Levi was dedicated to serving God. The Levites needed more time and mobility than a landowner could possibly have. Giving them land would mean saddling them with responsibilities and loyalties that would hinder the service of God. Instead, God arranged for the other tribes to meet the Levites' needs through donations. And it says, see Numbers 35, on how the Levites were to receive cities from each tribal territory. The land was divided exactly as God had instructed Moses years before. Joshua did not change a word. He followed God's commands precisely. Often we believe that almost is close enough, and this idea can carry over into our spiritual lives. For example, we may follow God's word as long as we agree with it and ignore it when the demands seem harsh. But God is looking for people who follow instructions thoroughly. And, we've talked about it before. He is very specific in his instructions. How many times we've seen in the Bible, especially the Old Testament, God says in details, he says, I want you to do this, this, and this. And instead of going by those instructions, they kind of, go around to whatever's best for them. And God always wins out, as you know, always. Caleb was faithful from the start as one of the original spies sent into the promised land. He saw great cities and giants, yet he knew God would help the people conquer the land. Because of Caleb's faith, God promised him a personal inheritance of land. Here, 45 years later, the land was given to him. Caleb's faith was still unwavering. Although his inherited land still had giants, Caleb knew the Lord would help conquer them. Like Caleb, we must be always faithful to God, not only at the start of our walk with him, but through our entire lives. We must never allow ourselves to rest on our past accomplishments or reputations. When Joshua gave Caleb his inheritance, it fulfilled a promise God had made to Caleb 45 years earlier. We expect such integrity and reliability from God, but do we expect the same from his followers? How about you? Is your word this reliable? Would you honor a 45-year-old promise? God would and does. Even today, he is honoring promises he made thousands of years ago. In fact, some of his greatest promises are yet to be fulfilled. This gives us much to look forward to. Let your faith grow as you realize that God keeps his word. And we go over to, still in chapter 14, paraphrasing. The Anakites were a race of giants who inhabited parts of the land before Joshua's conquest. And chapter 15 starts out, notice that these boundaries and descriptions of the promised land are very specific. God was telling Israel exactly what to do, and he was giving them just what they needed. They had no excuse for disobedience. In chapter 15, verse 16 through 19, Nathaniel became Israel's first judge after Joshua's death. And that was, he played an important role in reforming Israel by chasing away an impressive enemy army and bringing peace back to the land. Thus, Caleb's legacy of faithfulness continued to be the next generation. Excuse me. It says, asked Caleb for springs of water because her land was in the south and was very arid. Caleb probably granted her request as a wedding present. That was in 15, verse 19. And then going into chapter 16, although Joseph was one of Jacob's 12 sons, he did not have a tribe named after him. This was because Joseph, as the oldest son of Jacob's wife, Rachel, received a double portion of the inheritance. Joseph's double portion was divided between his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who Jacob considered as his own in Genesis 48:5. The largest territory and the greatest influence in the northern half of Israel belonged to their tribes. In chapter 16, verse 10, it says, occasionally this short phrase appears, they did not dislodge the people of the land. This was contrary to God's explicit desire and command. The failure to remove completely the pagan people and their gods from the land would cause many problems to the nation. The book of Judges records many of these struggles. Going to chapter 17, although women did not traditionally inherit property in Israelite society, Moses put justice ahead of tradition and gave these 5 women the land they deserved in Numbers 27, 1 through 11. In fact, God told Moses to add a law that would help other women in similar circumstances to inherit property as well. Joshua is now carrying out this law. It is easy to refuse to honor a reasonable request because we have never done it this way before. Have we ever heard that before? That we never have done it this way? Man, it says here, God don't like that. All right? But the Moses and Joshua, we should look carefully at the purpose of the law and merits of each case before deciding. In chapter 17 through 14 and 15, it says, notice the contrasting attitudes towards setting the promised land. Caleb took what God gave him and moved ahead to fulfill God's plan for him in 14:12. He was confident that God would help him drive out the wicked inhabitants and that he would soon fully occupy the land. In contrast, the 2 tribes of Joseph was given rich land and lots of it, but they were afraid to drive out the inhabitants and take full possession of it. Instead, they begged for more land. But Joseph asked them to prove first by clearing the unforest areas. They agreed, but they failed to carry out that task. And that comes from Judges 1 through 27, which comes right after Joshua in the Bible. Chapter 18, with conquest behind him, Israel moved center from Gilgal. I'm sorry. This was probably the most permanent location for the tabernacle. Its central location in the land made it clear for the people to attend the special worship services and yearly feast. The family of Samuel, a great priest and prophet, later would often travel to Shiloh, and Samuel would be taken there when as a small boy. The tabernacle remained in Shiloh through the period of the Judges, about 300 years. Apparently, the city was destroyed by the Philistines when the Ark of the Covenant was captured in 1 Samuel 4 and 5. Shiloh never lived up to its reputation as Israel's religious center. For later references in the Bible, wickedness and adultery in the city, in Psalms and Jeremiah. 7 of the tribes had not been assigned their land. They gathered at Shiloh where Joseph to determine what would be given to them. In this sacred would voice, not Joshua or any other human leader. By this time, the Canaanites were, in most places, so weakened that they were no longer a threat. Instead of fulfilling God's command to destroy the remaining Canaanites, however, these 7 tribes would often take the path of least resistance. Almost like us a lot, right? As nomadic people, they may have been reluctant to settle down, preferring to depend upon the economically how the people were supposed to eliminate. Others may have feared the high cost of continued warfare. Trading for goods was easier and more profitable than destroying the suppliers and having to provide for themselves. In chapter 18, Joshua asked why some of the tribes were putting off the job of possessing the land. Remember, God had told them they had to possess the land. And of course, at this point, it's not being done. Often we delay doing jobs that seem large, difficult, boring, or disagreeable. But continue putting them off shows lack of discipline, poor stewardship of time, and in some cases, disobedience to God. Jobs we don't enjoy require concentration, teamwork, twice as much time, lots of encouragement, and accountability. Remember this when you are tempted to procrastinate. In chapter 18, verse 8, making decisions by casting lots was a common practice around the Hebrews. Little is known about the actual method used in Joshua's day. A type of dice may have been used. Another possibility is that 2 urns were used, one containing tribal names, the other divisions of the land. Drawing one name from each urn matched the tribe to the region. The Urim and Thummim explained in the note on Leviticus 8:8 may also have been used. No matter how it was done, the process removed human choice from the decision-making process and allowed God to match tribes and lands as he saw fit. The tribe of Benjamin was given a narrow strip of land that served as a buffer zone between Judah and Ephraim, the 2 tribes that would later dominate the land. In chapter 18, around verse 16, the valley of Ben Hinnom became associated with the worship of Molech, the Ammonite god, in Jeremiah's time. These tribes' rites involved the sacrifice of children. Later, the valley was used for burning garbage and the corpses of criminals and animals. Thus, the name became a synonym for hell. The tribes west of the Jordan was Judah, Ephraim, and the other half tribe of Manasseh were the first tribes that received land west of the Jordan because of their past acts of faith. The remaining 7 tribes, Benjamin, Zebulun, Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, Simon, and Dan, were slow to conquer and possess the land allotted to them. In chapter 19, the tribe of Dan found that some of their land was difficult to conquer, so they chose to migrate to Leshem, where they knew victory would be easier. Anyone can trust God when the going is easy. It's when everything looks impossible that our faith and courage are put to the test. Have faith that God is great enough to tackle your most difficult situations. In chapter 19, there were several good reasons for establishing these well-set boundaries instead of turning the promised land into a large, undivided nation. The boundaries gave each tribe ownership of an area, promoting loyalty and unity that would provide significant strength to each tribe. The boundaries delineated areas of responsibility and privilege, which would help each tribe develop and mature. The boundaries reduced conflicts that may have been broken out if anyone had wanted to live in the choicest areas. The boundaries fulfilled the promised inheritance to each tribe. that began to be given as early as the days of Jacob. In chapter 20, verse 6, a new nation is a new land needed a new government. Many years later, God had told Moses how this government should function. One of the tasks God wanted the Israelites to do when they entered the promised land was to designate certain cities as cities of refuge. These were to be scattered throughout the land. Their purpose was to prevent injustice, especially in cases of revenge. For example, if someone accidentally killed another person, he could flee to a city of refuge where he was safe until he could find a fair trial. The Levites were in charge of these cities. They were to ensure that God's principles of justice and fairness were kept. For more than on the cities of refuge, go to Numbers 35 and 6 and 35, 11 through 28. In chapter 21, the Levites were to administer on behalf of the people, so they were given cities scattered throughout the land. Although Jerusalem was far away from the homes of many Israelites, almost no one lived more than a day's journey from a Levite city. In chapter 21, 43 through 45, God proved faithful in fulfilling every promise he had given to Israel. Fulfillment of such promises took several years, but every one was fulfilled. God's promises will be fulfilled according to his timetable, not ours. But we know that his word is sure. The more we learn of these promises God has fulfilled and continues to fulfill, the easier it is to hope for those yet to come. Sometimes we become impatient, wanting God to act in a certain way now. Instead, we should be faithfully doing what we know he wants us to do and trust him for the future. In chapter 22, at the beginning of 22, before the conquest had begun, these tribes were given land on the east side of Jordan River. But before they could settle down, they had to first promise to help the other tribes conquer the land on the west side, and that's in Numbers 32, 23 through 22. They had diligently and patiently carried out their promised duties. Joshua commended them for doing just that. At last, they were permitted to return to their families and build their cities. Follow through is vital in God's work. Because of the temptation to quit early and leave, God's work would then be undone. In chapter 22, around the 5th verse, here Joshua briefly restated the central message that Moses gave the people in Deuteronomy. Obedience should be based on love for God. Although the Israelites had completed their military responsibility, Joshua reminded them of their spiritual responsibility. Sometimes we think so much about what we are to do that we neglect thinking about who we are to be. If we know who we are, God's children, we will love him and joyfully serve him. We must not let daily service take away from our love for God. In chapter 22, 11 through 34, when the tribes of Reuben and Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh built an altar on the Jordan River, the rest of Israel feared that these tribes were starting their own religion and rebelling against God. But before beginning an all-out war, Phinehas led a delegation to learn the truth, following the principle taught in Deuteronomy 13, 12 through 19. He was prepared to negotiate rather than fight if a battle was not necessary. When he learned that the altar was for a memorial rather from the pagan sacrifice, war was averted and unity was restored. As nations and as individuals, we would benefit from a similar approach to resolving conflicts. Assuming the worst about the intentions of others only brings trouble. Israel averted the threat of civil war by asking before assaulting, because of beware of reacting before you hear the whole story. In chapter 22:17, for the story of how Israel turned away from God and began to worship Baal at Peor, see Numbers 25, 1 through 18. And also in chapter 20, but the story of Achan, a man who was allowed greed to get the best of him, see chapter 7. The tribes were concerned with that visible sign of unity between the people on the two sides of the Jordan. Future generations might see conflict between them. The altar, patterned after the pattern of the altar of the Lord, was to remind these people as they worship the same God. Often we need to be reminded of the faith of our fathers. What actions demonstrate to your children your reliance to God and remind them of what He has to be done. Take the time to establish family traditions that will help your children remember. So that's the end of where we're going to tonight. I didn't want to have to read. There's a lot of boring verses in there, and so I was trying to find something that would be better synopsis of what God expected out and also expects out of us at the same time. So some stuff tonight I'm going over. Of course, you guys didn't have the same material I had, so that's why I kind of took the horn here. So has anybody got any questions at all? As again, what we got here, a true leader is first a servant, and someone has been talking about serving, and yeah. And so you get a tremendous benefit of being a servant, and Pastor Anthony, he's been talking about that, and will continue to be talking about it. And of course, again, like I said before, having a good mentor can shape your destiny. And always remember that, especially around our youth. The same thing, with Anthony and the schools, the Christian schools he's at. Mentor is the way they survive, and the same thing is with us. Our kids, they need a mentor. For me and Trish, our kids and also our grandkids, they're our responsibility to mentor them, and we spend a tremendous amount of time with them, and we not only do we enjoy that and love that, and we love our grandchildren just like our children. And we expect them, to be in church, and we tell them when they're not, but most of the time they are, and we also try to direct them in the correct way to go the Bible. So next week will be the last of the Joshua is going to be faithful to his in Joshua 23 through 24. Can you Amen. Thank you for everybody coming tonight. Remember that next Wednesday night, Jan's going to be leading us next door. You're going to have it next door over here. Okay. Okay. All right, so we'll have it over here, and I appreciate everybody coming tonight. Thank you very much.